She didn't hand over the money to be helpful. She handed it over because she knew he was watching. She placed the unsealed manila envelope on the mahogany reception desk at 11:42 p.m. $70,000, crisp, untraceable, pressed flat like it meant nothing. Kyla Robert did not leave a name. She did not wait to be thanked. She straightened the edges of the envelope against the dark marble surface with 2 careful fingers, turned on her heel, and walked back toward the service corridor. Her uniform carrying the faint scent of spiced stock and kitchen smoke. Her face gave nothing. Her pace gave nothing. She moved the way a woman moves when she has already decided how this night ends. Behind the monolithic black marble column at the far edge of the dining room, a man stood in perfect stillness. He had been there for 11 minutes. His name was Joo-woo, and in the underground language of 4 continents, that name was not spoken lightly, or often, or twice. He had watched Kyla find the envelope in the abandoned VIP booth. He had watched her open it, both hands, no hesitation. He had watched her count it, every bill, with the quiet, rapid efficiency of someone who had handled serious money before. He had watched her hands go completely still when she reached the end of the count. Then he had watched her fold it closed, tuck it under her arm like it held nothing more valuable than a menu, and carry it to the front desk without breaking stride. He told himself he was being analytical. A person who returns $70,000 in cash is either genuinely honest or performing honesty for an audience. Both possibilities were worth investigating. He had built a criminal empire spanning Seoul to Singapore on the founding principle that every human action has an architecture underneath it, and every architecture has a flaw. He was simply doing what he always did. He stepped out of the shadow of the marble pillar and walked toward the exit. Outside, his armored sedan idled on the rain-slicked avenue, engine running, black as everything else about his life. He lowered himself into the back seat and looked at the back of the driver's head. "Follow that woman," he said. "Keep distance." The driver did not ask which woman. He had worked for Joo-woo for 9 years. He knew the specific quality of silence that meant a question was not welcome. The sedan pulled away from the curb. Through the rain-beaded windshield, Joo-woo watched her. She walked without urgency. No rushing, no looking back over her shoulder. The deliberate, calibrated rhythm of someone working a precise internal schedule. At each intersection, she crossed before the light changed. Not after, not during, but at exactly the right moment. She knew the timing of every signal on this grid. She had walked this route many times before. The city changed around them as the sedan followed at distance. The glass towers and valet-lit restaurant fronts gave way to older facades, painted brick and rusted iron fire escapes. The boutique wine bars dissolved into a check-cashing place with a neon sign, missing 2 letters, a laundromat spilling pale blue light onto the sidewalk at near midnight, a liquor store with barred windows and a man seated on a crate outside who was not waiting for anything in particular. Joo-woo looked out the window. He had driven through neighborhoods like this before, through every American city his distribution networks touched. He had approved route maps, cleared shipping corridors, signed off on the addresses of warehouses. But he had never once looked at what existed in the space between the highway off-ramp and the loading dock. It had not occurred to him that anything between those 2 points was worth seeing. She turned left onto Eddy Street. The street lamps here were spaced farther apart. Several of them were dark entirely. The ones still working cast a flat, yellowish light. The colour of something temporary, something that had not yet decided whether it planned to stay. She stopped in front of a brown stucco building on the corner of Eddy and Laguna. 5 stories, water stains running in long, dark rivers from the roofline to the 2nd floor. A front entrance with a security door held open by a piece of folded cardboard. She did not go in. She stood on the sidewalk beneath that failing amber light, and she was still for a full 2 minutes. Joo-woo watched. She set down her bag. She reached up and retied her hair, working each section with practiced fingers. She bent down and changed her shoes, the ones from her shift going into the back bag, a quieter pair replacing them. She straightened her jacket. She adjusted the collar. She pressed 2 fingers beneath her left eye and wiped something away with the back of her hand. Then she stood still again. She rolled her shoulders back. She lifted her chin by a fraction. She arranged her face, rearranged it precisely, deliberately, into something that was not a smile, but was close enough to pass for one if you were not watching carefully. Joo-woo was watching carefully. He had seen people compose themselves before high-stakes rooms. He had watched generals steady their hands before signing documents that decided the fates of organizations worth billions. He recognized the mechanics of it. The quiet, internal construction of a version of yourself that whoever waits on the other side of the door needs to believe is fine, needs to believe is holding together. This woman was doing it on a crumbling sidewalk in the middle of the night, not before a boardroom, not before a court, before her own home. She was building a face for the people inside the way other people build faces for shareholders. And she was doing it under a streetlight that barely worked next to a door held open by cardboard. And there was something in the precision of it. The complete refusal to let whatever the night had cost her show on her face. That landed somewhere in his chest in a way he did not have an immediate word for. She picked up her bag. She walked inside. The door swung closed behind her. A light came on in a third-floor window. Not an overhead light. A lamp. Warm, amber. The particular quality of warmth that someone has chosen deliberately, because the feeling of a room matters to them at the end of the day. Joo-woo sat in the back of his sedan and looked up at that window. He did not reach for his phone. He did not speak. He did not reach for the glass of water in the center console. He simply sat, looking up at that third-floor lamp, and he stayed that way for longer than he had been still in years. Then he took out his phone. He opened a note. He typed the address. 741 Eddy Street. Apartment 3C, he saved it. He put the phone back in his jacket pocket. He told the driver to take him home. On the ride back, the city reversed itself around him. The crumbling brick gave way to bay windows. The flickering check-cashing neon gave way to softly lit wine bars. The failing amber street lamps gave way to evenly spaced, high-pressure sodium lights that illuminated every inch of the sidewalk, as if even the infrastructure had decided that certain streets deserved to be seen more completely than others. He did not notice the transition. He was thinking about the 2 minutes on the sidewalk, about what kind of exhaustion requires that much architecture to conceal, about the distance, the precise, specific distance, between the dark marble reception desk where she had pressed $70,000 into her manager's hands without blinking and the cardboard wedged into the security door of her building. He was thinking about her hands, how they had gone still during the count and then moved again, how they had straightened the envelope's edges with the same care a man gives to a contract he intends to honor. He was thinking about the lamp in the window. He had the address. What he did not have, not yet, not for many days, was the answer to the question now sitting at the center of his chest like a blade pressed flat against bone. Who is she? Because in 11 minutes of watching Kyla Robert at work, Joo-woo had catalogued a woman who moved like someone trained to be invisible and returned a fortune like someone who had already decided the money was worthless to her. And in his world, the only people who treated $70,000 like worthless bait were people who were hunting something far more valuable. He had been in the business of hunting long enough to know. He had just been hunted. He just didn't know it yet. She returned $70,000 without blinking. And somewhere in the dark, the most dangerous man in 4 continents watched her do it and felt something crack open in his chest he has no name for yet. She knew he was watching. She wanted him to follow, and he did. Hit subscribe and turn on all notifications. Chapter 2 drops next, and the moment Joo-woo kicks in that door, nothing goes the way he planned. Comment below. Do you think Kyla is running from something or running toward it? Like, share, and let's go. The apartment at 741 Eddy Street exhaled the kind of silence that precedes violence, the held breath of a building that has seen too much and forgotten nothing. Joo-woo moved through the stairwell like smoke, his 3-man unit fanned behind him in a formation so practiced it required no words, suppressed pistols drawn, footsteps absorbed by tactical souls. The air inside the brownstone smelled of damp concrete and something older, something rotting at the bones of the walls. 3rd floor, apartment 3C. He had run her plate in under 4 minutes after leaving the restaurant. Cross-referenced the server uniform against the establishment's payroll. Found a name, found an address. Told himself this would be clean. A conversation, a retrieval. He was in and out of situations like this before most men finished their morning coffee. The door splintered inward on the first breach, and there was nothing. Not sparse, not abandoned in haste. Nothing. The apartment had been gutted to its skeleton. Bare walls, bare floor, no evidence that a single human being had ever pressed their warmth into that space. No scent of food, no ghost of perfume, no nail holes in the plaster. Even the light fixtures had been removed, leaving raw wire stumbling out of the ceiling like exposed nerves, except for the crate. Centered in the room with the deliberate precision of a placed chess piece sat a wooden crate, and on it a high-definition monitor, its blue glow the only source of light, casting everyone's shadow long and fragmented against the walls. Then her voice came through. "You move fast." A pause, unhurried. "I like that about you." The screen flickered to a live feed, 16 panels, each a different angle of the building, the street, the rooftops. She had eyes everywhere, and somewhere behind one of those lenses, she was watching him watch her. Joo-woo did not move. His jaw tightened, but he did not move. Kyla's face never appeared. Just her voice, low, sculpted, carrying the particular confidence of a woman who had already won a game before her opponent realized it had begun. "The 70,000, she said, letting the number settle. "You've been turning that over in your head since the moment I walked away. Who is she? Where did she get it? What does she want?" A soft exhale, almost amused. "It was yours, Joo-woo. Every dollar. I pulled it from your secondary offshore reserve at 2:47 this morning. The one you rotate every 90 days. The one your security architect swore was unbreachable." Another pause, this one sharper. "I returned it to you in a restaurant full of witnesses just to show your entire organization that the walls they trust are made of paper." The silence in the room had weight. One of his men shifted behind him. Joo-woo raised one finger. Still, he stared at the monitor, at the 16 angles of a trap he had walked into with full confidence, and somewhere beneath the controlled fury rising in his chest, something else moved. Something he had no immediate name for. Curiosity, maybe. The particular electricity of encountering something genuinely dangerous wearing a face that beautiful. Then the countdown appeared. White digits in the corner of the screen. Small, unhurried. Already at 41 seconds, no words were needed. The rear window went first. Joo-woo through it before conscious thought formed. His body reacting to years of surviving rooms that wanted to kill him. Iron fire escape, 3 stories of rattling metal, his men behind him, and then the world above them turned into a concussive wall of heat and burgundy light. The blast punched through the 3rd floor and exhaled through every window simultaneously. Shattered glass became its own weather system. The fire escape shuddered, groaned, and held. He hit the alley floor and rolled, came up on one knee and looked up. She was on the rooftop, across the street. Even at distance, through the smoke now curling between them like something alive, he could see her clearly. The dark architecture of her silhouette, the natural crown of her hair catching the orange light of the fire she had made. She held the detonator at her side, unhurried, unafraid. Her eyes found his through the chaos with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this exact moment. She looked at him the way a person looks at something they've decided to keep. Then she turned, and the dark folded around her like it had been waiting. Joo-woo rose from the debris, a cut above his brow weeping quietly, his suit destroyed, his pride in ruins. His men said nothing. There was nothing to say. He touched the blood at his temple, looked at it on his fingers, and felt something he had not felt in years. Not rage. Interest. He would go to Seoul. He sat with that certainty for exactly as long as it took to question it. She had cut the feed herself. He had watched the disconnection happen in real time, clean and controlled, every frame of it deliberate. And yet Seoul had landed in the silence just before she severed it. Not a slip. Not an accident. A woman who had spent months building shell companies across 4 jurisdictions did not make accidental slips. She had given him the coordinate. He filed that away. In the part of his mind he reserved for things he did not yet understand, but intended to, and told his driver to call ahead to Seoul. He would find her. The more precise question, the one that rode with him through the rest of the night, was whether she had already decided to let him. By morning, the brownstone on Eddy Street was a wound in the city's skyline. Charred timber and scorched brick cordoned behind yellow tape, while investigators who owed Joo-woo favors ensured the official report said nothing useful. He had showered, changed, and sat in the back of his car for 11 minutes without speaking. His driver knew better than to fill that silence. The cut above his brow had been closed with 2 strips of medical tape. Everything else, the humiliation, the fury, the strange magnetism of a woman who had blown up a building just to make a point. He buried beneath the architecture of control he had spent 2 decades constructing. He called his operations director before the car reached the highway, freeze the regional lines. Every supply corridor between the eastern seaboard and Seoul locked. If Kyla was funded through the syndicate's shadow economy, which every instinct told him she was, he would drain the water and watch where she was forced to surface. It was a clean, decisive move, the kind that ended careers. He arrived at the glass tower that housed Yeon Global Logistics at 7:43 a.m. and knew something was wrong before the elevator doors opened. His legal team stood clustered in the corridor outside the boardroom, like men caught in the early stages of panic. Jackets buttoned wrong, phones gripped too tightly, the particular pallor of people delivering news they'd spent the night dreading, the institutional debt. She had moved on the institutional debt. His general counsel laid it out with the efficiency of someone who had rehearsed the words to remove their own emotion from them. Shell companies, 14 of them, constructed across 4 jurisdictions over the past 8 months. Each one a legitimate legal entity, each one quietly acquiring the underlying debt instruments of Yeon Global's parent structure. Not the surface company, the bones of it, the financial architecture that held everything above water. Kyla had not attacked the empire. She had purchased the ground it was built on. Joo-woo sat at the head of the boardroom table. The panoramic windows behind him turned Seoul's skyline into wallpaper. He said nothing for a long moment, and the room held its breath accordingly. Then the projector flickered on. She had called in through an encrypted relay, her signal bouncing through enough nodes that tracing it in real time was an exercise in futility. But her image was crisp, her face finally visible, and it was precisely as he remembered it. That structured elegance, the deep brown of her skin luminous even through a corporate feed. Her natural hair pulled back with a severity that did nothing to soften the intelligence radiating from her eyes. She wore no jewelry. She needed none. She was dressed in charcoal grey and looked like she owned the room she was calling into. Because she did. "Good morning," Kyla said, and the boardroom's acoustics carried her voice like something ceremonial. She walked them through it herself. Slide after slide. Shipping manifests, route discrepancies, cargo weights that didn't reconcile with customs declarations. Years of meticulous documentation, assembled with the precision of a forensic accountant who also happened to understand exactly which global authorities would be most interested in receiving it. Interpol, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. 3 separate congressional trade committees. She wasn't threatening to destroy him. She was showing him she already had everything she needed to do it, and had chosen so far not to. "You froze the regional lines this morning," she said, looking directly into the camera with the composure of someone who had anticipated that move before he made it. "That tells me you're reactive. Reactive men make mistakes." A pause, precise as a scalpel. "I don't." Joo-woo leaned forward slowly, elbows on the table, and when he spoke, his voice carried the particular quiet of a man exercising maximum restraint. "You've been building this for months." "Not a question. An acknowledgement." "Longer," she said. "What do you want?" The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile, not quite contempt. Something suspended between them. A conversation, a real one, without the strike teams. The feed cut. 16 seconds of total silence followed. Someone across the table began to speak, and Joo-woo raised one hand. The word died unborn. He stood, straightened his jacket, and looked out at the city through 60 feet of glass. He would find her before she expected him. Seoul arrived the way it always did, indifferent. The city didn't care that a man like Joo-woo Park stepped off a private jet at 2 a.m., with the kind of silence behind his eyes that preceded devastation. Seoul had seen men like him before. It had built them, buried them, and lit itself up in neon over their graves, without pausing a single breath. The Han River gleamed below the penthouse windows like spilt ink, its surface broken only by the occasional drag of rainfall, slow, deliberate, the kind of rain that didn't rush because it knew it had already won. He hadn't slept on the flight. He had sat with her face in his mind instead, not as a problem, not yet. As a texture, something that didn't sit right against everything else he knew. The precision of her hands when she passed that envelope. The careful blankness she had maintained while his eyes swept the restaurant floor. Trained blankness. Not natural composure. There is a difference. And men like Joo-woo had built empires on knowing exactly which one they were looking at. He poured a glass of scotch he didn't drink and made one call. By the time the rain thickened against the floor-to-ceiling glass, his intelligence director had dispatched 3 operatives into the architecture of a ghost. The files arrived before dawn, physical dossiers, because some things were still too dangerous to exist in any server that breathed. Carried in a sealed case by a man who left without making eye contact. Joo-woo spread them across the low table between the glow of the city and the glow of his laptop screen, and the contrast of old paper against blue digital light felt like 2 different centuries colliding. Kyla Robert. American, 29, no prior criminal record, no syndicate affiliations. Deceased. Confirmed via Cook County death certificate. 7 years prior, he stared at that last line for a long time. Deceased. He pulled the photograph. A young woman, brown-skinned, unremarkable in the way civilian lives often are, all soft edges and ordinary grief. Nothing in those eyes matched the woman he had watched move through his restaurant like water, finding the shape of every room it entered. The woman using this name was not this woman. He turned the next page. The intelligence was slow to yield, the kind of information that had been buried with intention, layered beneath false identities, and redacted federal files with the bureaucratic patience of someone who understood that the best graves are the ones nobody goes looking for. But Joo-woo's network had long arms and longer memories, and eventually, the way truth always does, It surfaced, a photograph, older. A man shaking hands with Baco Syndicate's first architect at a Geneva summit that officially never happened. Director Malcolm Webb, American Federal Intelligence. The original architect of the syndicate's international funding pipeline before the operation went dark, before the money became untraceable, before Joo-woo Park had climbed high enough to make certain arrangements permanent. Before he had looked that man in the eyes and made a decision that consolidated everything. He turned one more page. A child in the background of a surveillance photo, maybe 10 years old, watching her father from across a hotel corridor with the focused stillness of a girl who was already learning how to read rooms. Dark skin, sharp eyes, her natural hair pulled back tightly. The kind of child who had clearly been told to stay invisible and had decided instead to simply study every person who walked past. She had clearly never stopped. Weber Daisy, known aliases, 17. Current status, unconfirmed. Classified training record, redacted. Suggests field-level capability consistent with elite disavowed unit at ease. He said it once, quietly, just to feel the shape of it. The name of a woman who had spent years becoming no one so that she could become close enough to him to become everything. She wasn't here for territory. She wasn't here for money or leverage or the syndicate's next power shift. She was here because he had stood across from her father in a room that only 3 people had ever known about, and he had made sure only one of them walked out. She had crossed an ocean and buried herself inside a stolen name and walked into his restaurant with an envelope in her hands and grief so perfectly compressed it moved like discipline. He almost admired it. Almost. He closed the file, reached for his phone, composed 3 words to his communications director. Leak the summit, and then set the phone face down on the table. She wanted him. He would make himself findable. Seoul would be the stage, and this time he would be the one waiting. The room had no windows. That was the first thing Kyla noticed. Not the silk-draped walls, the colour of dried blood. Not the gold fixtures that caught the low light like teeth. Not the 2 men who'd closed the door behind her with the quiet finality of a coffin lid. No windows. Whoever designed this room understood that hope was a distraction. Her wrists were bound behind her with a cord that bit just enough to remind her it was there. They'd taken her earpiece, her secondary blade, the decoy phone. They had not found the syringe, she made sure of that. She stood in the centre of the room and waited. Her breathing was even, her jaw set, her dark eyes scanning every corner with the calm precision of someone who had already calculated 3 exits from a room that had none. The silk walls swallowed sound. The air tasted faintly of cedarwood and something else. Metallic, almost sweet. She recognized it the way you recognize a song you never wanted to hear again. Right on time. The door opened and Park Joo-woo walked in alone. He filled the doorway the way a storm fills a sky. Not loudly, but completely, until there was nothing else. He wore black, as always, the collar open at his throat, and he moved with the deliberate economy of a man who had never once needed to rush toward anything he wanted. He closed the door behind him. He did not look at her immediately. He set down a glass of water on the side table with the care of someone performing a ritual. And then, only then, he looked up. The moment their eyes connected, the room shrank. "You made it easy," he said in Korean, his voice a low current beneath still water. Kyla answered in the same language, flawless. "I always do what I intend to do." Something shifted in his expression, too fast to name. He crossed the room slowly, and she did not move, did not retreat a single inch, even as the space between them narrowed to something almost intimate. He stopped close enough that she could see the faint tension in his jaw, the careful stillness of a man keeping something leashed. He drew the blade from inside his jacket. It was elegant, matte steel, no ornamentation, chosen for function over vanity. He pressed the flat edge to her throat with surgical precision, not breaking skin, just pressing. a sentence written in steel. "The access keys," he said. "All of them." Kyla tilted her chin up, not in defiance, in something more dangerous than that. In patience, and then she laughed. Soft, low, almost affectionate. The sound of it against the blade seemed to confuse him more than resistance would have. "You should sit down," she said quietly. "The keys, Kyla." In about 40 minutes, she continued, as if he hadn't spoken. "You're going to feel it first, behind your eyes. A pressure, then your hands." She paused. "You're already breathing it." The blade did not move, but she watched his eyes, watched the precise moment the word "it" landed, watched him run the calculation, watched him arrive at the only conclusion the room allowed. "2 hours ago," she said, "I was in your building's mechanical floor. The summit ventilation runs through a single recirculation point. Elegant design, actually. Terrible oversight. She let the silence do its work. The neurotoxin is contactless, airborne. Slow-acting enough that no one in that room will feel it until it's academic." The blade at her throat did not waver, but something in the hand holding it did, almost imperceptibly, almost nothing. She felt the shift in him the way you feel a decision form, not in the words, but in the breath that comes before them. "Everyone upstairs," she continued, her voice dropping lower, like a secret shared between them. "Your men, your associates, the 3 generals you flew in from Busan, they're all already in the same room I'm in." Joo-woo's eyes darkened. "You poisoned yourself." "I poisoned us!" She held his gaze with something that wasn't quite a smile. "There is one antidote, pre-filled, enough for one person, or, if diluted carefully, enough for the room." She felt his stillness change quality, the quality of a man whose entire empire has just narrowed to a single glass cylinder. "It's on my person, and I'm the only one who knows where." The blade stayed at her throat for a long moment, 1 breath, 2, while the weight of what she'd done settled over him like smoke. Slowly, with the kind of control that costs everything, Park Joo-woo lowered the blade. The power in the room did not shift so much as it redistributed it, quietly, like sand rearranging itself after a wave. And when it settled, she was standing at the center of it, his jaw tightened. His eyes moved over her face with an expression she had never seen on him before. Something between fury and a reverence he would never name aloud. Behind her back, her fingers curled around the syringe. She waited and let him breathe. He did not ask her twice. That was the thing about Park Joo-woo. He understood leverage the way other men understood breathing, instinctively, without ceremony. He stepped back, blade still in hand, and watched her with the measured quiet of a man recalibrating every assumption he'd made in the last 6 months. Kyla moved to the room's single desk and pulled the terminal from beneath its silk cover with her freed hands, her dark wrists bearing faint impressions from the cord like a confession. She sat, spine straight, the syringe now visible on the table between them. A small, terrible truce made of glass and poison. "You have 20 minutes before the first wave hits the summit floor," she said, without looking at him. "Then stop narrating and work." She almost smiled. Without turning from the screen, she slid the syringe to the edge of the desk. "Dilute it. 1 part to 4. There's a ventilation return behind the panel on the east wall, the one your architect installed during the 09 renovation." A pause. "It will reach the summit floor in 11 minutes. She heard him move behind her. She did not watch him comply. She was already working. Her fingers moved across the encrypted interface with the fluency of a second language. The kind learned not in classrooms but in basements, in the dark, under duress. She pulled up her informant channel, the one buried under 7 proxy layers, and a decryption architecture so specific that only 2 people in the world held matching keys. The contact who had fed her every piece of intelligence that made this operation possible. The voice in the machine that had guided her, quietly and precisely, through the Baco Syndicate's most fortified secrets. The keys aligned. The channel opened. The system stalled for exactly 3 seconds, which, in cryptographic time, was an eternity. And then it rendered the source metadata in a cascade of red characters across the screen. Kyla stopped breathing. She read the identifier twice. Then a third time, the way you reread a word that suddenly stops making sense, waiting for it to rearrange itself into something bearable. It didn't. She turned in the chair slowly. Joo-woo was watching her from across the room, and in the red wash of the error light now bleeding from the terminal, she saw something in his expression she had not expected. Not guilt, not triumph. Something older than both. The exhaustion of a man who has been carrying a secret so long it had become part of his skeleton. "It was you," she said. The words came out with no volume, no inflection. Pure disbelief, stripped of everything else. He said nothing, which was its own answer. "You fed me the intelligence." Her voice found its edge now, sharpening as it rose. The syndicate elders. The financial routing. The safe houses. Every target I hit. She stopped. Her jaw tightened. "You used me. You aimed me at your own organization like a weapon and pointed me at everything you wanted gone." "The men I sent you after were corrupt beyond salvage," he said quietly. "I didn't have the political position to move against them directly. You had the access, the skill, and the motivation." "My motivation," she said, standing, "was grief. My father." The words landed like stone on stone. "And you built your operation on top of his grave." Something crossed his face then. Something that looked dangerously like pain. "I did not manufacture your grief. That I did not touch." Before she could answer, the terminal screamed. A third-party intrusion hit the system with the force of a controlled demolition. Clean, precise, surgical. Every proxy layer she'd built collapsed in sequence. The server architecture didn't just breach. It peeled, layer by layer, the way skin peels from something that has been burning quietly for a very long time. And at its center, where the source of the original manipulation should have been a blank ghost, was instead a profile. A restaurant in America. A woman. An alias she hadn't seen in 11 years. Kyla's hand found the edge of the desk. Vivienne. The image in the file was taken from a distance. A woman in her 60s. Silver-haired, impeccably dressed, standing at the entrance of a dining room that Kyla recognized with the sick intimacy of a recurring dream. The restaurant where she had first received the envelope. Where everything had started. The woman who had taught her how to disappear, how to wound, how to survive the kind of grief that makes you dangerous. Her teacher, her architect. The file opened further, and the scope of it became visible like a map unfolding. Vivienne had been feeding Joo-woo's paranoia for 18 months, while simultaneously fueling Kyla's investigation. Every piece of intelligence from both directions filtered through the same elegant hands. Not to start a war between them. To use their war as a scalpel, precise, disposable, deniable, to excise the Baco syndicate from existence entirely. They had both been instruments in a much older composition. Kyla looked up and found Joo-woo's eyes already on her. The temperature in the room had dropped, the facility's power grid stuttering, the lights bleeding red then dimming. In the failing light, his expression held something she recognized, the specific look of a man who has just discovered that his entire life has been a corridor someone else designed. She knew that look. She'd seen it in her own mirror. Neither of them spoke. The server stacks hummed their indifferent rhythm, and somewhere above them, the summit floor was already beginning to fall. The shipyard existed in the kind of dark that cities forget they contain. Industrial, absolute, broken only by the sodium yellow of distant dock lights bleeding through curtains of rain. The containers rose like a steel city unto themselves. Rusted walls groaning under the weight of the downpour, the air tasting of brine and cold iron, and the particular silence of a place that had never been designed for the living. Kyla moved through it like she was part of it. Her dark skin was sheened with rain, her close-cropped hair slicked flat against her skull, her jaw set against the cold that had long since stopped mattering. She tracked the mercenary signal through the labyrinth of containers on pure instinct. The same instinct Vivian had spent years sharpening into something barely human. She heard him before she saw him. Not footsteps, breath. The controlled, measured breath of someone who had also been trained never to be heard. She turned the corner and he was already there. They collided with the force of two things that had been moving toward each other for a very long time. There was nothing elegant about what followed. No choreography, no distance. It was elbows and knees and wet gravel under boots. The grunt of impact against a steel wall that rang like a struck bell. Her forearm across his throat, and his hand twisting her wrist with a precision that was almost respectful. She broke free. He caught her jacket. She let it tear. He anticipated the strike that followed and deflected it into the container wall, and the sound of her knuckles as against steel rang up her arm like a tuning fork. She was bleeding before she registered the blade. He was favouring his left side before she registered the kick that had landed there. The rain made everything heavier. Their clothes, their hair, the air itself, and still they moved through it, neither willing to yield, neither capable of it. At one point, she had him down on one knee and felt the specific satisfaction of having cornered something dangerous. And then the world inverted, and she was the one on the ground with his weight above her and the cold mud against her shoulders. And she laughed, short, breathless, almost delirious, because she recognized this. This was the only honest conversation they had ever had. She got the gun up. He got the blade in place. They froze. The rain roared against the containers overhead, hollow and enormous, the sound of it filling every silence. Her compact firearm pressed beneath the sharp angle of his jaw, angled upward, unambiguous. His tactical blade rested at the curve of her throat, against her carotid. She could feel her own pulse, pressing into the edge of it, calm and steady as a metronome. His other hand had found her shoulder without quite meaning to, holding rather than pinning, as though the gesture had arrived from somewhere his training hadn't prepared for. Her dark eyes found his found hers, and the intention to kill simply left, not with drama, not with a speech. It departed the way conviction sometimes does, quietly, between one breath and the next, leaving something rawer and far more frightening in its absence. She watched it happen in his face, and knew, with a certainty that landed like cold water, that he could see the exact same thing happening in hers. The rain dripped from the barrel of her gun in a thin silver thread. Neither of them moved. "You're the only person," he said very quietly, "who has ever made me work for it." She didn't answer immediately. The blade at her throat did not waver. Her finger did not leave the trigger. But something in her chest had shifted, the way tectonic things shift. Not loudly, not visibly, but fundamentally, deep below the surface where no one is supposed to be able to reach. "You built an empire," she said, "and you're still the loneliest person in it." His jaw tightened. Because it was true. Because she knew it was true the way she knew it about herself. Intimately, structurally, in the architecture of every choice she had made since the age of 19, when Vivian had sat across from her in a room not unlike the one they'd shared tonight, and taught her that brilliance is a gift that costs you everyone it doesn't frighten. She had been frightening people ever since, until him. The rain fell between them like a curtain being drawn, and drawn and drawn, and still neither of them stepped through it. His eyes moved over her face with the careful attention of a man memorizing something he'd decided, against every rational argument he possessed not to destroy. She felt it. She lowered nothing. He lowered nothing. But between the gun and the blade, in the cold salt air of a shipyard at the edge of the world, something was born that was darker than hatred and far more dangerous. The terrible recognition of a soul that fits against yours, like a wound you've been carrying the shape of your whole life. The rain didn't stop. They stayed. The first shot came from the eastern perimeter, and it was the kind of shot that wasn't meant to hit. It was meant to announce. A flare round, arcing white and cold over the shipyard's edge, and in its light, the mercenaries materialized from the dark, like a thought you'd been trying not to have. 12, at minimum, moving in the compressed, professional formation of people who had been well paid and well briefed. Kyla and Joo-woo looked at each other across 3 feet of rain-soaked ground, weapons still raised, her pulse pressed against his blade's memory, his jaw still carrying the ghost of her barrel's pressure. Neither said a word. He moved left, she moved right. That was all the agreement they needed, and all they would ever admit to. They came through the shipyard in parallel, not together, a distinction that mattered to both of them, the way principles matter to people who have very few left. Kyla took the high ground, scaling a container stack with the fluid economy of someone who had long ago made peace with heights and danger as constant companions. From the upper ridge, she mapped the mercenary grid in 4 seconds flat. The spacing, the communication lag, the one man on the eastern flank who held his weapon slightly high, betraying either overconfidence or poor training. She chose him first as a matter of professional preference. Below her, in the narrow steel corridors between containers, Joo-woo moved like something the dark had manufactured specifically for this purpose. She caught glimpses of him between the gaps, the controlled economy of his turns, the silence of his footwork on wet gravel, the way he read the mercenaries' formations and fed them angles they thought were advantages until they became something else entirely. He was precise in the way that only men who have spent years being precise can be. Not fast for the sake of it, but exactly fast enough. Every motion a decision already made. She covered his blind spots, he covered hers. Neither acknowledged it. When they reached the estate, the gates were already open. Vivienne had planned for the shipyard. She had not planned for them to arrive at the Blood Palace together. The Baiko ancestral estate rose from the coast, like something that had decided centuries ago to outlast everything around it. Marble and dark wood, and the accumulated weight of a lineage that had built its fortune on fear. The mercenaries inside moved through its corridors with the confidence of an invading army, and for approximately 4 minutes that confidence was justified. Then Kyla came through the mezzanine window. She moved through the upper levels like weather, low, fast, inevitable. The estate's marble absorbed the gunfire into a rhythmic percussion that bounced through its high ceilings, and she used the echo to track positions the way other people use sight. Her dark silhouette crossed the upper galleries above the chandelier light, and the men who looked up found, universally, that looking up had been their last decision. She was not cruel about it. Cruelty requires emotion she was no longer spending on Vivienne's instruments. Below, she heard Joo-woo's work in the spaces between her own. The brief, clipped exchanges of a man who considered unnecessary discharge a form of poor argument. He cleared the lower east wing in the time it took her to reach the central landing. And when she looked down through the marble balustrade, she found him already looking up. A muzzle flash from the corridor behind him. Her arm came up. The shot was already gone before the thought completed. He didn't flinch. He simply turned and continued moving. The control room was at the estate's heart, a converted study behind a steel-reinforced door that had been installed long after the marble floors, out of a paranoia that had proven, in the end, entirely justified. The door was open when they reached it. Vivienne had left it open. An invitation, or a resignation. With women who had spent their lives in the architecture of other people's destruction, the two were often indistinguishable. She stood at the center of the room, before a wall of screens, silver-haired and impeccable, her hands folded at her waist with the composure of someone who had been expecting this particular visit for some time. She looked at Kyla the way a sculptor looks at a finished piece, with ownership, and something that might, in another life, have been love. "You were always my finest work," Vivian said. Kyla looked at her for a long moment, long enough to honor what had been real between them, long enough to bury it. "That was the problem," she said. She looked at Joo-woo once, across the width of the room, across the bodies they'd left in the marble corridors. To reach this moment, his eyes met hers with the silent precision of a shared decision. No discussion, no hesitation. They had never needed either. The screens went dark, the room went quiet, and the woman who had built their war from grief and paranoia, and the cold patience of a legend with nothing left to lose, was gone from the world exactly as she had sent so many others out of it. Without warning, and without an audience willing to mourn her. Gunpowder hung in the air between them like incense. Joo-woo stood at her shoulder, close enough that she felt the warmth of him against the estate's chill, and for a moment neither moved, both looking at what they had made of the night. The manipulation was over. What remained between them had no architect but themselves. Soul glittered below them like a circuit board at full power, indifferent, brilliant, eternal. The penthouse boardroom sat above it all in glass and steel silence. The kind of room where empires were negotiated, and men convinced themselves that what they controlled was the same as what they owned. The city's reflection ran the full length of the obsidian table, like a river of light that had nowhere left to go. Kyla stood at the window with her back to him, her dark silhouette cut against the skyline, the rain from the shipyard still in her hair, her shoulders carrying the night's weight with the particular stillness of someone who has already decided what happens next. She was bleeding from her left side. Minor, manageable, the kind of wound that would remind her of this room for weeks. She considered it a fair price. Behind her, she heard Joo-woo cross to the control panel beside the boardroom door. The locks engaged, all of them. "The elevator shafts have been sealed since we arrived," he said, his voice carrying that low, almost conversational quality he reserved for moments of total control. "There are 3 snipers on the adjacent rooftop. North, northeast, and the angle you'd consider using." He paused. "I know how you think." She turned from the window slowly. He stood at the head of the table, his jacket gone, his dark shirt carrying the evidence of the night's work. A man stripped of every pretense the evening had removed. His eyes moved over her with the focused attention of someone who had invested too much in this particular problem to be casual about its resolution. "You've been patient," she said. "I've been thorough." She walked toward him. Not away from the snipers, not toward the door. Toward him, which was the one direction he hadn't fully calculated, and she watched him register that in the almost imperceptible adjustment of his posture. Her dark fingers reached out and traced the lapel of his suit jacket where it lay over the back of his chair, a gesture so unhurried it bordered on tenderness. Then she pressed the blade against his chest, lightly, just enough. "While we were clearing the estate," she said, "my automated network was completing a transfer. Full sweep of the Baco Syndicate's cryptocurrencies reserves. Every wallet, every cold storage's address, every emergency account your elders thought was invisible." She held his gaze without blinking. "It took 11 minutes. Your snipers have been out there for 12. The silence that followed was the most honest thing the room had ever contained. She watched him absorb it, the calculation moving behind his eyes with the precision of a machine that refuses to miscount. Denial arrived first, as it always does in intelligent men, and then left quickly when the numbers refused to cooperate. What replaced it was something she had seen only once before, in a shipyard, in the rain. The particular quality of a man discovering he has been comprehensively outplayed and finding, against every instinct, that it does not entirely feel like loss. You would bankrupt your own position too. I would bankrupt us, both, before I let you have a clean victory. She tilted her head slightly, her dark eyes level with his. That's the difference between us. You still want to win. I'm willing to burn the board. Another silence. The wind moved against the glass with a low, sustained note, the city humming its ignorant chorus 40 floors below. Kyla reached into her jacket and drew out a single manila envelope, empty, sealed, identical in weight and colour to the one that had started all of this in a restaurant in America, on a night that now felt like a different century. She set it on the glass table and slid it toward him. Slowly. Deliberately, the echo of their beginning made material. Western operations, she said. The global shipping hubs. The Atlantic corridor accounts. She straightened. You keep the Eastern Empire. Every syndicate contact, every regional alliance, every arrangement your family spent 3 generations building east of the meridian. He looked at the envelope. Then he looked at her. The reserves. Return to Baco control upon execution of the arrangement. Every wallet, every address, intact. She held his gaze without softening it. Consider it escrow, held by someone with every incentive to return it, provided you give her one. He picked up the envelope, turned it once in his hands, the same hands that had held a blade to her throat, that had gripped her shoulder in a shipyard while the rain tried to drown them both. He set it back down without opening it. A divided throne, he said. A permanent standoff. She held his gaze. Neither of us moves against the other without guaranteed mutual destruction. We both know it. This just makes it official. You'll spend the rest of your life waiting for me to break the arrangement, he said. You'll spend the rest of yours trying to find the angle. Her chin lifted slightly, and something moved through her expression. Not a smile, exactly, but the shape of one, sharp and private. I'm counting on it. She picked up her jacket from the chair, walked to the emergency stairwell door. She had unlocked 40 minutes ago during the building's power fluctuation, and paused with her hand on the frame. A daze, he said it quietly. No inflection, no weight beyond the word itself. Just the name from the dossier, the name that preceded every alias, every city, every identity she had assembled over 11 years of deliberate disappearance. She had not heard it spoken aloud in longer than she could honestly measure. She had not expected it to cost her anything. It cost her one full breath. She stood with her hand on the frame and did not turn around. The city burned its indifferent gold, 40 floors below. Behind her, she felt the weight of his attention move across her shoulders the way it always had, like something that had already decided it was not finished. She stepped through the door. The city swallowed her whole, and Park Joo-woo stood alone at the head of his glass table with an empty envelope in his hand, and her real name still in his mouth, the skyline burning beneath him, already thinking about his next move. If your pulse is still running from that final exchange, you already know this story isn't finished. Hit subscribe and turn on all notifications. The next phase of their war is coming, and you will not want to arrive late. Drop a comment right now. Who makes the first move in round 2, Kyla or Joo-woo? Like this video if dark, cinematic romance is exactly your kind of dangerous, and share it with someone who understands that the most compelling love stories are the ones where neither person is safe. The shadows are waiting,